Hello everyone, I am Jack Bond's Sleep Story. Sended my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls, which appeared to be bare earth supported by old wooden beams. As my feet touched the ground, I had to hunch over to avoid hitting my head on the low ceiling. I swept the light around, taking in my surroundings. The tunnel stretched out in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The walls were lined with pipes and old electrical wiring. It looked like some kind of maintenance access, but why would it be accessible? From a guest room, curiosity overrode caution, and I decided to explore a bit further. I chose the direction that I thought led further into the motel and started walking, my footsteps muffled by the earthen floor. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, the air grew cold. Older and damper water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing ominously. I was about to turn back when I heard something that made me freeze in my tracks. Voices. They were muffled and distant, but unmistakably human. My first instinct was to call out, but something stopped me. There was an urgency to the voices' attention that put me on edge. I crept forward, following the sound. As I got closer, I could make out words: shipments coming in, and tomorrow night we need to be ready. What about the cops? Johnson's been sniffing around. Don't worry about Johnson, he's been taken care of. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a casual conversation, it sounded like something illegal was going down. I edged closer, straining to hear more. The boss wants this to go smoothly, no mistakes this time. Got it? Yeah, we'll be ready. What time? Midnight, the usual spot. I leaned in, trying to catch more details, when suddenly my foot slipped on a wet patch of ground. I stumbled, my hand shooting out to catch myself against the wall. In the process, my phone clattered to the ground, the flashlight beam spinning wildly. The voices abruptly stopped. My heart leapt into my throat as I heard footsteps approaching. Panic seized me as I scrambled to retrieve my phone, fumbling in the darkness. What was that? Did you hear something? Check it out now. I snatched up my phone and turned, ready to sprint back the way I came, but in my haste and confusion I took a wrong turn. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could see the bobbing beam of a flashlight behind me. I ran blindly, no longer caring about stealth. My lungs burned as I gasped for air in the stuffy tunnel. I could hear shots behind me, spurring me to run faster. Suddenly my foot caught on something. A root or a piece of debris, I couldn't tell. I went down hard, landing face first in the dirt. Pain shot through my knee and palms, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet just as a beam of light fell on me. Hey, stop right there. I didn't look back, just ran. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning. I had no idea where I was or how to get back to my room. All I knew was that I had to get away. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw something ahead, a ladder similar to the one in my room. Without hesitation, I lunged for it, practically flying up the rungs. I burst through the trapo, finding myself in another motel room. It was dark and empty, thank God. I slammed the trapo shut and dragged the nearest piece of furniture, a heavy dresser, over it. Panting heavily, I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. I had stumbled upon something big, something dangerous. Those men in the tunnel were clearly involved in criminal activities, and now they knew someone had overheard them. I peered out the window, trying to get my bearings. I was on the ground floor at the back of the motel. My room was on the second floor near the front. I had no idea whose room this was or when they might return. A plan started to form in my mind. I needed to get out of here fast, but first I had to get back to my room and grab my things. I couldn't leave any trace of my presence. Cautiously, I opened the door and peered out. The parking lot was quiet, no sign of any suspicious activity. I slipped out, trying to look casual as I made my way back to the main building. My heart was in my throat as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. What if they had already found my room? What if they were waiting for me? I approached, my door key card in hand. Taking a deep breath, I swiped it and pushed the door open, half expecting to find angry criminals waiting for me, but the room was empty, exactly as I had left it. I let out a sigh of relief, then quickly began gathering my things. I had to get out of here before they figured out which room I was in. As I stuffed clothes into my bag, my mind raced. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That I had eavesdropped on a criminal conversation while trespassing in a secret tunnel? It sounded insane even to me. No, the safest thing to do was to leave quietly and anonymously. I could think about what to do with the information once I was far away from here. I did one last sweep of the room, making sure I hadn't left anything behind. The trapdoor was still open, a dark maw on the floor. I hesitated, then closed it and dragged the armchair over it. It wasn't much, but it might slow them down if they came looking. With my bag packed, I took a deep breath and opened the door. The hallway was clear. I made my way to the stairs, forcing myself to walk at a normal pace despite every instinct screaming at me to run. As I reached the lobby, I heard voices coming from the front desk. I froze, recognizing one of them as the man from the tunnel. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I couldn't go out the front, I'd have to find another way. I backtracked, following signs to a side exit. Just as I pushed the door open, I heard a shot behind me. They'd spotted me. I ran, no longer caring about looking suspicious. I sprinted across the parking lot to my car, fumbling with the keys. The shots were get closer. Finally, I got the door open and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life just as two men burst out of the motel. Entrance. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching in my rearview mirror. I could see them running towards a parked car. They were going to follow me. My hands shook as I navigated the dark streets, constantly checking the mirror. How far would they chase me? What would they do if they caught up? I drove for hours, taking random turns, doubling back, doing everything I could to lose any tail. It wasn't until the sun started to rise that I finally allowed myself to relax a little. I pulled into a rest stop, exhausted and shaken as the events of the night replayed in my mind. I realized how close I had come to real danger, all because of a hidden trapdoor and my own curiosity. As I sat there watching the sunrise and contemplating my next move, one thing was clear: I would never look at a motel room the same way again. Sometimes the secrets hidden behind closed doors are better left undiscovered. The first drop of rain hit my face like an icy warning. I looked up at the darkening sky, cursing my luck. What had started as a peaceful day hike was about to turn into a nightmare. I'd never forget. I'd been walking for hours, enjoying the solitude of the forest and the crisp autumn air. The trail was supposed to loop back to my car, but somewhere along the way I must have taken a wrong turn. As the shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped, I realized with growing dread that I was lost. The rain started in earnest, fat drops pelting through the canopy above. I pulled my lightweight jacket tighter, but it did little to keep out the chill. My boots squelched in the quickly forming mud as I pushed on, hoping to find my way back to a familiar path. Thunder rumbled in the distance and I picked up my pace. The last thing I needed was to be caught in a full-blown storm. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something that made my heart leap. A cabin. It was small and weathered, its wooden walls gray with age, but it was shelter. And right now that was all that mattered. I jogged towards it, relief flooding through me. As I reached the small porch, the door was unlocked, creaking open at my touch. Hello, I called out, not wanting to intrude if someone was inside. No answer. I stepped in, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The cabin was sparse but cozy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and I could see a small kitchenette in the corner. A narrow staircase led up to what I assumed was a loft. It looked like it hadn't been used in a while. A fine layer of dust covered everything. I shrugged off my wet jacket, hanging it on a hook by the door. Outside, the storm was picking up, wind howling through the trees. I was grateful for the solid walls between me and the elements. After a bit of searching, I found some dry firewood stacked near the fireplace. It took a few tries with my damp matches, but soon I had a small fire going, its warmth a blessed relief after the chill of the rain. As I sat by the fire, trying to dry out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cabin was a godsend, but why was it unlocked and why did it feel like it had been abandoned in a hurry? I pushed the thoughts aside, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. I was safe, dry, and could wait out the storm. In the morning I'd find my way back to civilization. As night fell, the storm showed no sign of letting up. The wind had picked up, whistling through gaps in the cabin's walls. Tree branches scraped against the roof, sounding unnervingly like claws trying to get in. I tried to distract myself by exploring the cabin more thoroughly. In a drawer I found an old journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting faded. I could only make out bits and pieces. Day 3, the noises are getting louder, something's out there. Day 7, I saw it today, God help me, I saw it. Day 12, can't sleep, it's always watching. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. If you're reading this, get out now. I snapped the journal shut, my heart racing. It was just the ramblings of some paranoid hermit, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. A loud crack of thunder made me jump and suddenly the cabin was plunged into darkness. The fire had gone out. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam barely piercing the thick darkness. As I moved to relight the fire, a sound froze me in place. It came from outside, a low guttural growl that was definitely not the wind. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was, again, closer this time, and then another sound, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the porch. My mind raced. Was it a bear, a mountain lion? Whatever it was, I didn't want to meet it. I backed away from the door, looking for something to defend myself with. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could hear heavy breathing, snuffling at the crack under the door. My own breath came in short, panicked gasps. The door handle began to turn slowly, deliberately. I raised my makeshift weapon, a fire poker I'd grabbed from beside the fireplace, ready to face whatever was coming through that door. But the door didn't open. Instead, the handle stopped moving and I heard the footsteps retreat. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A new sound reached my ears. Something was climbing up the side of the cabin. I could hear claws scraping against wood, moving towards the window. I backed into a corner, my eyes fixed on the window. A shadow passed by, momentarily blocking out what little moonlight filtered through the storm clouds. Then I saw it, a face pressed against the glass, but it wasn't human. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow in the darkness, its features twisted into something nightmarish. Our gazes locked and I felt a primal fear unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. It disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, but I could still hear it moving around outside, circling the cabin. I was trapped with only a flimsy wooden structure between me and whatever that thing was. Hours passed like this, with me huddled in the corner, jumping at every sound, the creature, for lack of a better word, seemed content to wake me out, occasionally scratching at the walls or letting out a low growl to remind me of its presence. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, the noises outside finally ceased. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, but there was nothing but silence. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the door. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and yanked the door open. The porch was empty. The forest beyond was quiet, peaceful, even as if the terrors of the night had been nothing but a bad dream. But the deep claw marks in the wooden railing told a different story. I didn't wait around to see if the creature would return. I grabbed my still damp jacket and set off down the trail, my legs carrying me as fast as they could go. I didn't know if I was going the right way, and at that point I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that cabin as possible. It was mid-afternoon when I finally stumbled onto a road. A passing motorist took pity on me, giving me a ride to the nearest town. I must have looked a sight muddy, disheveled, with wild eyes. And an even wilder story, the local sheriff listened patiently as I recounted my experience, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He promised to send someone to check out the cabin, but his tone made it clear he didn't expect to find anything. As I sat in a diner later waiting for a friend to come pick me up, I couldn't shake the memory of those glowing eyes, that inhuman face. I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, even if no one else believed me. I glanced out the window towards the forest looming in the distance. For a moment I could have sworn I saw a shadow move between the trees, a pair of yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness, but when I blinked it was gone. I turned back to my coffee, my hands shaking slightly as I raised the cup to my lips. I knew one thing for certain: I would never set foot in those woods again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some creatures better left undiscovered. As I left the diner, the journal I'd found in the cabin weighed heavy in my pocket. Its warning echoed in my mind: if you're reading this, get out, get out now. I had gotten out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow, someway, the thing from the woods would find me again. I climbed into my friend's car, casting one last glance at the forest as we pulled away. I made a silent vow to myself I would be ready next time, because deep down I knew there would be a next time. The creature had my scent now, and something told me it wasn't the type to give up easily. The trees receded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of that night in the cabin would stay with me forever. It was a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the monsters we imagine in the dark, but the ones that are all too real, waiting just beyond the light of our campfires, watching and waiting for their moment to strike. I never thought I'd have to fight for my own home, but there I was, staring into the eyes of a stranger who claimed my house was his, and I knew this night would end in either triumph or terror. It had been a long day at work, the kind where everything that could go wrong did. I was looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower, a glass of wine, and mindless TV before bed. As I turned the key in my front door lock, I was already mentally picking out which comfy pajamas I'd wear. The door swung open and I stepped inside, kicking off my heels with a sigh of relief. That's when I noticed something off. There was a jacket I didn't recognize draped over the back of my couch, and was that the smell of cooking coming from my kitchen? My heart started to race. Had someone broken in? Should I call the police? Before I could decide, a man walked out of my kitchen, a dish towel slung over his shoulder. "Oh, hey there," he said as casually as if we were old friends. "You must be the previous tenant. Did you forget something?" I stood there, frozen in shock. "Previous tenant? What was he talking about?" "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice shakier than I'd like, "but who are you and what are you doing in my house?" The man's friendly smile faltered for a moment. "Your house? I think there's been some misunderstanding. I just moved in today. The landlord gave me the keys this morning. I felt like I was in some bizarre dream." "That's impossible. I own this house. I've lived here for 3 years." He shook his head, looking concerned. "Now look, I'm sorry, but I think you've made a mistake. I have a signed lease right here." He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a folder, pulling out a document. I approached cautiously, my mind reeling. This had to be some kind of scam, right? But as I glanced at the paper he held out, I saw what looked like a legitimate lease agreement dated today, with this man's name, James Thompson, and my address. This isn't right," I said, my voice growing stronger with indignation. "I never rented this place out. I own it. There must be some mistake." James ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "Listen, I don't know what's going on here, but I paid a deposit in first month's rent. I have a legal right to be here." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police. This is ridiculous." "Wait," James said, holding up his hands, "let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why don't we call the landlord and sort this out?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to dial 911 right away, but another part worried about looking foolish if this really was some big misunderstanding. "Fine," I said, "let's call the landlord, but I'm telling you there is no landlord. I own this house." James nodded and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and hit dial, putting the phone on speaker. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, Mr. Peterson, this is James Thompson, the new tenant at 1242 Elm Street. There seems to be some confusion. The previous owner is here and says she never rented out the house." My jaw dropped. I recognized that voice. It belonged to my sleazy neighbor Bob Peterson, who had been trying to get me to sell my house to him for months. "So, must be a misunderstanding," Bob stammered. "Don't worry about it, James. She probably just forgot you rented it out. You've got a legal lease, so you're in the clear." I snatched the phone from James's hand. "Bob, what the hell do you think you're doing? You know damn well I didn't rent out my house." There was a pause, then a click as Bob hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then at James, who looked as confused As I felt, look, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, I don't know what's going on here, but I can prove this is my house. I have the deed, tax documents, everything. James held up his hands. Hey, I'm just as confused as you are. I answered an ad online, met with Mr. Peterson this morning, signed the lease and got the keys. I've been moving in all day. I walked over to the bookshelf where I kept important documents, my mind racing. This had to be some elaborate scam by Bob, but why and how did he get keys to my house? As I reached for the folder with my house documents, I noticed something else amiss. Several of my books were gone, replaced by ones I didn't recognize. I yanked open the drawer of the side table. My spare keys weren't there. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been in my house, methodically replacing my things with someone else's. How long had this been going on? I turned back to James, who was watching me with a mix of concern and weariness. We need to call the real police, I said. Right now, he nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm telling you, I had no idea about any of this. I'm as much a victim here as you are. I wanted to believe him, but at this point I didn't know what to think. I dialed 911 and quickly explained the situation. They said they'd sent someone over right away. While we waited, I paced the living room, pointing out to James all the things that were mine, all the changes I'd made to the house over the years. He list Riven away from the warehouse for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement for what the future held. My boring nights as a security guard were over, but a new chapter was just beginning, and this time I'd be the author of my own story. The warehouse faded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of that night would stay with me forever. It was the night that changed everything. The night I learned that sometimes the most ordinary job can lead to the most extraordinary adventure, and I was ready for whatever came next. The moment the lights flickered and died, I knew this wasn't going to be just another stormy night. Little did I know the darkness that enveloped my house would bring with it a terror I'd never imagined possible. I'd been curled up on the couch halfway through a thriller novel like Con when the storm hit. Rain lashed against the windows and wind howled through the trees outside. It was the kind of night that made you grateful for the comfort of four walls and a roof. The power had been flickering on and off all evening, so when it finally gave out completely, I wasn't surprised. I set my book aside with a sigh and fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to navigate to the kitchen where I kept my emergency candles. As I rummaged through drawers looking for matches, a loud thump from downstairs made me freeze. My house was old, full of creaks and groans, but this was different. This sounded deliberate. I held my breath, listening intently. For a moment all I could hear was the pounding of rain on the roof, then unmistakably the sound of footsteps. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was in the house. I clutched my phone tighter, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But what if it was just my imagination? I'd feel foolish if I called 911 over a case of storm-induced paranoia. Another creak, closer this time. Whoever it was, they were at the bottom of the stairs. Now I needed to hide. My bedroom was just down the hall, but to get there I'd have to cross the open space at the top of the stairs. If the intruder looked up at the wrong moment, the decision was made for me. As I heard the first stair groan under the intruder's weight, they were coming up. I darted across the hallway, praying the storm would mask any noise I made. I slipped into my bedroom and eased the door shut, fighting the urge to slam it and give away my position. My hands shook as I tried to unlock my phone to call for help, but in my panic I must have turned it off. The startup screen glowed mockingly at me, taking an eternity to load. The footsteps were on the landing, now slow and deliberate. They paused and I held my breath, certain whoever it was could hear my thundering heartbeat. A floorboard creaked right outside my door. I backed away, looking wildly around for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on the heavy lamp on my bedside table. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I unplugged the lamp, gripping it tightly as I positioned myself behind the door. If they came in, I'd have one chance to surprise them. The door handle turned slowly, the latch clicking as it released. Time seemed to slow down as the door began to swing open. A shadow fell across the floor, elongated and distorted in the faint light from the window. I raised the lamp, every muscle in my body tense. The intruder took one step into the room. I swung the lamp with all my might. There was a sickening thud and a cry of pain. The figure stumbled, and I used that moment to shove past them, bolting for the stairs. I took the steps two at a time, nearly falling in my haste. Behind me I could hear angry shouts and the thunder of pursuit. I reached the bottom of the stairs and headed for the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open it. Just as I managed to turn the deadbolt, a hand grabbed my shoulder, yanking me backward. I screamed, more in fury than fear, and swung my elbow back hard. It connected with something solid, and the grip on my shoulder loosened. I wrenched the door open and burst out into the storm. Rain immediately soaked through my clothes. As I ran down the driveway, I had no plan, no destination in mind other than way. My bare feet slapped against the wet pavement, small stones biting into my soles, but I barely noticed the pain. I chanced to look back and saw a figure silhouetted in my doorway. They seemed to hesitate for a moment before starting after me. I put on an extra burst of speed, rounding the corner onto the Main Street. Surely one of my neighbors would be home, would help me if I could just reach them. I ran to the nearest house, pounding on the door. Help, I screamed, my voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Please somebody help me. No response. The house remained dark and silent. I moved to the next house and the next, growing more desperate with each unanswered door. Where was everyone? The sound of running footsteps spurred me on. I couldn't tell how close my pursuer was. The storm distorted everything. making it impossible to judge distance. As I approached the end of the street, I saw a glimmer of hope. The Johnsons' house had a light on in the upstairs window. Someone was home. I sprinted towards their house, my lungs burning. Just a little further, just a little more. I was halfway up their driveway when something hit me from behind, sending me sprawling onto the wet grass. I rolled over to see my attacker looming over me, their features hidden in shadow. "No!" I yelled, kicking out wildly. My foot connected with their knee and they stumbled back with a grunt of pain. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run again, when suddenly the area was flooded with light. The Johnsons' porch light had come on. "What's going on out here?" a gruff voice called out. I turned to see Mr. Johnson standing on his porch, a baseball bat in hand. Relief washed over me. "Please," I gasped, "help me. This person broke into my house. They're trying to." I broke off as I turned back to my attacker. In the light from the porch I could finally see their face clearly. "It was my neighbor Ted, Sarah," he said, looking as confused as I felt. "What are you talking about? I heard you screaming and came to check on you." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process this new information. "But the noises, someone was in my house." Ted shook his head. "I didn't see anyone. Your front door was wide open and I could hear you yelling from down the street." Mr. Johnson had come down from his porch, still clutching his bat. "Is everything all right?" I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it again. How could I explain what had happened when I wasn't even sure myself anymore? I thought someone had broken in. I said, "Finally, I heard noises. It's an old neighborhood." Mr. Johnson said kindly, "These houses make all sorts of noises, especially in storms like this. Are you sure it wasn't just the wind?" I wanted to protest, to insist that what I'd heard was real, but doubt was already creeping in. Had I imagined it all? Had my fear turned creaky floorboards into an intruder? Maybe, I said uncertainly. "I don't know anymore." Ted put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Come on, let's get you back home. You're soaked to the bone." As we walked back to my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The fear had been so real, the danger so immediate. How could it all have been in my head? We reached my front door, still standing open for my frantic escape. Ted insisted on checking the house just to be safe. I waited on the porch, shivering in my wet clothes, as he went from room to room. "All clear," he said when he returned. "No sign of anyone." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. "Thank you, and I'm sorry for attacking you." Ted chuckled. "No harm done, though. You've got quite an arm on you. That lamp packs a punch." I managed a weak smile. "I'm never going to live this down, am I?" "Don't worry about it," Ted said. "We've all had moments where our imagination gets the better of us. Get some rest. Things will look better in the morning." After Ted left, I locked the door securely and headed upstairs to change into dry clothes. As I passed the spot where I'd hit Ted with the lamp, something caught my eye. There on the hardwood floor was a muddy footprint, a large one, much bigger than my own foot, and it was facing towards my bedroom, not away from it like it would have been if it was Ted's from when he came to check on me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. There had been someone in my house and they were still out there somewhere. I grabbed my phone, fully charged now, and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I stared at that muddy footprint, a stark reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are all too real. The storm continued to rage outside, but it no longer seemed like the biggest threat. Someone had been in my house tonight, and something told me they wouldn't give up so easily, whatever their intention had been. I had a feeling this was far from over. As I gave my statement to the police, I couldn't shake the image of that shadowy figure in my doorway. Who were they? What did they want? And most importantly, when would they be back? One thing was certain: I would be sleeping with the lights on for a very long time. I never should have stopped. That's what I keep telling myself, replaying that moment over and over in my mind. But when I saw him standing there in the pouring rain, thumb out, looking so desperate, how could I have known that act of kindness would turn into the most terrifying night of my life? The windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle against the downpour as I drove along the winding country road. It was well past midnight and I was exhausted from a long day of meetings in the city, but I was almost home. Just another hour or so of driving and I'd be in my own bed. That's when I saw him, a lone figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated briefly by my headlights. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to him like a second skin. As I got closer, I could see he was trying to hitchhike. His thumb stuck out hopefully. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to keep driving. It was late, I was alone, and picking up strangers was never a good idea, but something about the desperation in his posture made me slow down. I pulled over, rolling down the passenger side window. "Just a crack. You okay?" I called out over the sound of the rain. He jogged over, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours." I studied him for a moment. He looked harmless enough, maybe in his mid-30s, with a kind face and tired eyes. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door hop and I said, "Where are you headed?" He slid into the passenger seat, water dripping from his clothes onto the upholstery. "Just to the next town," he said. "There's a motel there where I can stay for the night." I nodded and pulled back onto the road. "I'm Jake," I said, figuring I should at least know the name of the man I'd let into my car. "Mike," he replied with a grateful smile. "Thanks for stopping. I was starting to think I'd be out here all night." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. I snuck glances at Mike out of the corner of my eye. He was staring out the window, his expression unreadable in the darkness, so I said, trying to break the awkward silence, "What brings you out this way?" Mike turned to look at me, and for a split second I saw something in His eyes that made my blood run cold, but it was gone so quickly I thought I must have imagined it. "Oh, you know," he said casually, "just passing through. What about you? You live around here?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how much information I was giving to a complete stranger. Yeah, about an hour up the road." Mike nodded, his eyes still fixed on me. "Must be nice living out in the country like this, peaceful, quiet." Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. "Yeah, it's nice," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Look, there's a gas station coming up. Maybe we should stop and see if they can help with your car." Mike's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "No," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "Keep driving." I glanced at him, my heart starting to race. The kind, weary traveler was gone, replaced by someone else. His eyes were cold, his jaw set in a harsh line. "I think you should let me out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady now. He laughed to sound devoid of any humor. "I don't think so, Jake. We're going to keep driving and you're going to take me exactly where I want to go." My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this situation. I could try to stop the car, but at this speed in this rain I'd likely crash. I could try to overpower him, but I had no idea if he was armed. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. Mike smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "What do I want?" "Oh, Jake, I want everything." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light of the dashboard. "At first I want your wallet, then your phone, and then we're going to take a little trip to your house. I bet a guy like you has some nice things." My stomach dropped. He knew where I lived, or at least he knew it was close. I had to do something, and fast. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "My wallet's in my back pocket. Let me pull over and I'll get it for you." Mike's grip on the knife tightened. "Nice try. Keep driving. I'll get it myself." He leaned over, his free hand reaching around to my back pocket. In that moment of distraction I made my move. I slammed on the brakes, sending us both lurching forward. Mike's head hit the dashboard with a sickening thud. Before he could recover I threw the car into park and lunged for the knife. We grappled in the confined space, the knife between us like a deadly game of tug-off where I could feel the blade nicking my hand, but adrenaline dulled the pain. With a final burst of strength I wrenched the knife from his grasp and threw it into the back seat. Mike roared with rage, his hands now free to pummel me with wild, angry blows. I raised my arms to protect my face, frantically searching for the door handle. With my other hand I found it and threw the door open, tumbling out onto the wet asphalt. My Mike was right behind me, grabbing at my legs as I tried to scramble away. The rain was still coming down in sheets, making the ground slick and treacherous. I slipped and fell, Mike's weight landing on top of me. We rolled on the ground, each fighting for dominance. In the struggle my hand closed around something hard and cold, a rock. Without thinking I swung it with all my might. There was a sickening crack and suddenly Mike's weight was gone. I scrambled to my feet, panting and disoriented. Mike lay on the ground, unmoving, blood mixed with rain running in pink rivulets across the asphalt. For a terrifying moment I thought I'd killed him. Then he groaned, stirring slightly. Relief and fear wared within me. He was alive, but for how long, and what would happen when he came to? I ran back to the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away I could see Mike in my rearview mirror, slowly pushing himself up to a sitting position. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, not caring about the rain or the slick roads. All I wanted was to put as much distance between myself and Mike as possible. When I finally saw the lights of the next town I nearly wept with relief. I pulled into the police station parking lot, my car barely in park before I was out and running towards the entrance. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and questions. They sent out patrols to look for Mick, but the storm had washed away most of the evidence. They assured me they would keep looking, that they would find him. But as I sat in the station, a shock blanket around my shoulders and a cup of lukewarm coffee in my trembling hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Mike was still out there, and he knew more about me than I was comfortable with. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the rain-soaked town, I made a decision. I couldn't go home, not yet, maybe not ever. Mike had taken more than just my sense of safety. He'd taken my ability to trust, my belief in the goodness of strangers. I called my boss, told him I needed some time off, then I checked into a motel under a false name, paid in cash, and tried to figure out what to do next. As I lay on the lumpy motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly life can change. One moment of misplaced kindness, one split-second decision, and suddenly everything you know is turned upside down. I don't know if they'll ever catch Mike. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe picking up a hitchhiker again, but I do know one thing: the next time I see someone standing on the side of the road, thumb out, looking desperate, I'll keep driving no matter how hard it's raining. The moment I opened my hotel room door and saw a stranger rifling through my suitcase, I knew this wasn't going to be the relaxing business trip I'd planned. What I didn't know was that this encounter would spiral into a night of terror that would change my life forever. I just returned from a long day of meetings, my feet aching in my too tight dress shoes, my mind fuzzy from hours of PowerPoint presentations. All I wanted was a hot shower and to collapse into bed. But as I swiped my keycard and pushed open the door, I was jolted awake by the sight before me. A man probably in his mid-30s was standing over my open suitcase, my clothes strewn across the bed. He looked up as I entered, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by an unconvincing smile. "Oh, hello," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "There must be some mistake. This is my room." I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "Your room," I managed To stammer, "No, this is my room 304. I checked in this morning." The man's smile never wavered, but I noticed his eyes darting towards the door behind me. I see the confusion. "I just checked in an hour ago. The front desk must have made a mistake. Why don't we go down together and sort this out?" Every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong here. This man was lying, that much was clear, but why, and more importantly, what was he really doing in my room? I took a step back, my hand still on the door handle. "I think I'll call the front desk from here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile faltered for a moment. "No need for that," he said quickly. "Look, I have the key right here." He held up a key card identical to mine. My heart was pounding. Now, how did he get a key to my room? Was he working with someone at the front desk? I needed to get out of there to get help. "Okay," I said, forcing a smile of my own. "Let's go down together and sort this out." I stepped back into the hallway, expecting him to follow. Instead, he lunged forward, shoving me hard. I stumbled, my back hitting the opposite wall of the corridor before I could. The police arrived quickly, taking my statement and inspecting my room. They found no signs of forced entry, which only deepened the mystery. How had that man gotten a keycard to my room? The officers assured me they would review the hotel's security footage and try to identify the intruder. Despite their reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Someone had invaded my space, gone through my belongings, and I had no idea why. The hotel offered to move me to a different room, but the thought of staying there another night was unbearable. I packed my things, checked out, and drove to a nearby motel. As I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, every creak and rustle set my nerves on edge. Who was that man? What had he been looking for? And, most chilling of all, would he come back? This would be a night I would never forget, a reminder that sometimes, even the most mundane trips can turn into nightmares. Down hard, tumbling down a steep incline, I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and in pain. As I tried to get up, a sharp pain shot through my ankle, sprained, maybe broken. I bit back a sob of frustration and fear. I could hear Jim getting closer. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide and spotted a hollow log a few feet away. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to wiggle inside, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. Jim's footsteps crunched through the leaves, pausing at the top of the incline. "I know you're down there, Sarah," he called out, his voice sickeningly playful. "Why don't you come out and we can talk about this?" I pressed a hand over my mouth, willing myself to be silent. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to him make his way down the slope. "You know," he continued, his voice getting closer, "you're not the first to try and run, but they all come back in the end. They always do." A chill ran through me at his words. How many others had there been? How long had he been doing this? His footsteps stopped right next to my hiding place. I could see his boots through a crack in the log. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, so close I could hear his breathing. Then, finally, he moved on. "I'll find you, Sarah," he called out as he walked away. "You can't hide forever." I waited until I couldn't hear him anymore before crawling out of the log. My ankle throbbed, but the pain was nothing compared to the fear coursing through me. I knew I couldn't outrun him, not in this condition. I needed a plan. Looking around, I spotted a sturdy branch that could serve as a makeshift crutch. As I leaned on it, testing my weight, an idea began to form. Jim thought he knew these woods better than anyone, but that was about to become his downfall. Over the next few hours, I set traps, tripwires made from vines, pitfalls covered with leaves, anything I could think of to slow him down or, better yet, incapacitate him. As the sun began to set, I heard Jim's voice again, closer this time. "Getting dark, Sarah. Woods can be dangerous at night. Why don't you come on out, and we'll go back to the nice warm cabin?" I gritted my teeth, steeling myself. This ended now. I let him see me, just for a moment, before limping away. I heard him laugh, thinking he had me. "That's right, Sarah. Nowhere to run now." I led him on a merry chase, always staying just out of reach, leading him deeper into my trap-laden section of the forest. I heard him curse as he tripped over one of my wires, then cry out in pain as he fell into a pitfall. That was my chance. I turned and hobbled as fast as I could toward where I thought the road might be. Behind me, I could hear Jim's enraged shouts growing fainter. Just wet pictures of the hidden cameras, and assured me they would investigate thoroughly. I sat in the station, trembling, replaying the events in my mind. The officers returned after several hours with grim expressions. They had found the cameras exactly as I described, as well as a room in the cabin filled with monitors and recording equipment. Tom was gone, but they were confident they would catch him. Over the following weeks, the investigation uncovered that Tom had been running a network of hidden camera rentals, secretly recording guests in his cabins and selling the footage online. Dozens of victims came forward, their lives shattered by the violation of their privacy. I couldn't shake the sense of unease, even after hearing that Tom had been arrested. Every creak of a floorboard, every flicker of light, sent a shiver down my spine. The cabin that had once seemed like a charming escape had turned into a symbol of betrayal and terror. I vowed never to rent a secluded property again. And now, whenever I check into a hotel or rental, the first thing I do is search for hidden cameras. The experience left me scarred, but it also taught me to trust my instincts. The world can be a beautiful place, but it can also hide horrors in the most unexpected corners. And I thought my strength would give out. I saw it, the glint of moonlight on metal, a car. The road. I broke through the tree line, waving my arms frantically at the approaching headlights. The car screeched to a halt, and a startled couple peered out at me. "Please," I gasped. "Help me. Call the police." As we sped away from the forest, my ordeal finally over, I couldn't help but think of Jim's words. How many others had there been? How many hadn't escaped? I made a silent vow then and there. Once I was safe, once Jim was behind bars, I would find out. I would make sure every one of his victims got justice. Terrified of what I might see, I rolled over. There was nothing there. I blinked confused. Had I imagined it all? Was this all some fear-induced hallucination? A twig snapped to my left and I whipped my head around. Nothing. Another snap, this time to my right again. Nothing. It was toying with me. I realized whatever this thing was, it was enjoying my fear. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I forced myself to my feet. I couldn't just lie there and wait for it to finish its game. I had to keep moving. I limped forward, using trees for support. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound was a potential attack. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but I was shivering uncontrollably, as much from fear as from cold. As I stumbled along, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this some psychopath hunting humans for sport, a deranged hermit driven mad by isolation, or was it something else entirely, something not quite human? I didn't have time to dwell on these questions for long. Ahead I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. Civilization, safety. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the protests of my battered body. The light grew brighter, resolving into the glow of electric lights. A ranger station. With a final burst of energy, I burst out of the tree line. The station was there, solid and real, its windows bright against the darkness of the forest. I half ran, half limped to the door, pounding on it with what little strength I had left. "Help!" I croaked, my voice horror from hours of panicked breathing. "Please, someone help me." The door opened and I nearly fell into the arms of a startled-looking park ranger. "With there," he said, helping me inside. "What happened to you?" I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a confused jumble. "The footprints, the chase, the figure, and the lightning." The ranger listened, his expression growing more concerned by the second. Okay, slow down," he said, guiding me to a chair. "You're safe now. Let's get you warmed up and then we'll figure this out." As he wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and pressed a mug of hot coffee into my hands, I couldn't help but glance out the window. The forest pressed close to the station, dark and impenetrable. Was it still out there, watching, waiting? The next few days were a blur of police statements and medical checkups. They found my abandoned campsite, confirming at least part of my story, but there was no sign of my pursuer, no evidence of anyone else in the area. Most people seemed to think I'd gotten spooked by normal forest sounds and let my imagination run wild. A few suggested I might have had some kind of stress-induced breakdown. Only the park ranger who found me seemed to take my story seriously. "These woods are old," he told me quietly when no one else was around. "They hold secrets, things that most people wouldn't believe. Whatever you saw out there, just be glad you made it out." As I finally headed home, my ankle in a brace and my nerves still frayed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my ordeal wasn't over. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see that figure in the lightning flash, still feel those empty sockets staring into my soul. I don't know if I'll ever go camping again. The wilderness, once a source of peace and adventure, now holds only terror for me. But I know one thing for certain: whatever was out there in those woods, it was real, and somewhere deep in the dark forests of the Appalachian Trail, it's still waiting, watching, hunting. For now, I'll stick to the safety of the city, but part of me knows that someday, somehow, I'll have to face those woods again, because until I do, until I confront whatever it was that chased me through the rain and darkness, I'll never truly be free of the fear that now shadows my every step. The wilderness may have won this round, but the game I fear is far from over. The moment I heard those inexplicable noises coming from the supposedly empty floor, I knew my mundane night shift was about to take a terrifying turn. Little did I know what I was about to discover. would haunt me for the rest of my life? Sure. Here's the continuation of the story based on the previous section. The wilderness had left its mark on me, a deep scar that refused to heal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadowy figure from the woods, its empty sockets boring into my soul. But life didn't stop. I tried to push forward, burying myself in work and surrounding myself with the bustle of city life. For months, I avoided anything that reminded me of the outdoors, campgrounds, nature documentaries, even the faint smell of pine. But the fear lingered, an unrelenting shadow that clung to me no matter where I went. One evening, I received an unexpected call. It was from the ranger who had saved me that night. "Mike," he said, his voice low and steady, "I think we need to talk. Something's been happening out here, and I thought you should know." My stomach dropped. I had done everything in my power to put that night behind me, but his words pulled me right back into the heart of the forest. "What's going on?" I asked hesitantly. "There have been more reports. Campers going missing. Strange footprints. Sounds in the night," he said. "It's like whatever was out there isn't satisfied. It's getting bolder." My first instinct was to hang up, to tell him I didn't want anything to do with it. But then he added something that made my blood run cold. "I found something at your old campsite." "What?" "I think you should see it for yourself." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The following weekend, I found myself driving back toward the forest I had sworn never to return to. The ranger met me at the entrance, his face lined with worry. He led me through the woods, retracing the steps I had taken that fateful night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. Finally, we arrived at my old campsite. "I found this buried near the edge," the ranger said, pulling out a small, tattered notebook. I opened it with trembling hands. The pages were filled with frantic, barely legible handwriting. The entries described the hiker's descent into madness, footsteps in the night, shadows that moved on their own, whispers carried on the wind. The final entry made my blood run cold. "It's here. Watching. It won't let me leave. If someone finds this, warn them. Tell them to stay away. The forest doesn't forgive." I stared at the words, a chill running down my spine. "What do we do?" I whispered. The ranger shook his head. "I don't know. But one thing's for sure, whatever this thing is, it's not going away." As we stood there, the wind picked up, carrying with it a sound that froze me in place. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps in the distance. The ranger and I exchanged a glance, our unspoken fears mirrored in each other's eyes. "Run," he said. We sprinted through the woods, the sound of footsteps growing louder, closer. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to let us go easily. And as I ran, one thought consumed me: the forest wasn't done with me yet. The forest seemed alive as we ran, every tree and shadow conspiring to trap us. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but the sound of the footsteps behind us pushed me forward. "Faster," the ranger shouted, his voice tight with panic. We broke through the dense undergrowth into a small clearing. The light of the setting sun filtered through the trees, but it brought no comfort. The footsteps had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against my ears. The ranger motioned for me to stay quiet as he pulled a flare gun from his pack. "Stay close," he whispered, scanning the tree line. "It's playing with us." "What is it?" I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then said, "I don't know. But it's been here long before us." A sudden movement to our left made us both spin around. The shadows seemed to shift and ripple, and then, emerging from the trees, I saw it again. The figure. It was taller than I remembered, its body unnaturally elongated, its head tilting at an angle that defied anatomy. The sockets where its eyes should have been bore into me, and its mouth, if it could be called that, twisted into a gaping, jagged grin. The ranger raised the flare gun and fired. The brilliant light illuminated the creature, revealing its horrifying form in full. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its skeletal frame, and its limbs seemed to bend in impossible ways. The creature let out a guttural, inhuman screech and retreated into the shadows, but we knew it wasn't gone. "Move," the ranger barked, grabbing my arm. We sprinted again, this time following a faint trail that led downhill. My mind raced as I tried to process what I had just seen. No animal, no human, could look like that. The ranger pulled me to a stop near a rocky outcrop. "We can't keep running," he said, panting. "It'll wear us out. We have to make a stand." "A stand?" I echoed, incredulous. "Against that thing? Are you insane?" "Listen to me," he said, gripping my shoulders. "That thing is territorial. It doesn't want us here. If we show it we're not afraid, if we fight back, it might let us go." I wanted to argue, to beg him to keep running, but deep down I knew he was right. My body couldn't take much more, and the creature was faster, stronger, and more relentless than we were. The ranger handed me a heavy flashlight and a hunting knife. "Stay behind me. If it gets close, use this." Before I could respond, the forest erupted in sound. The creature's screech echoed all around us, coming from every direction at once. "It's here," the ranger muttered. The shadows moved again, and the creature emerged, circling us like a predator sizing up its prey. The ranger raised his flare gun, but the creature didn't flinch this time. It lunged. The next moments were chaos. The ranger fired another flare, momentarily blinding the creature. I swung the flashlight wildly, trying to keep it at bay. The creature's movements were impossibly fast, its limbs contorting as it darted in and out of the shadows. The ranger shouted something, but I couldn't make out the words over the pounding of my heart and the creature's unholy screeching. And then it was on me. Its skeletal hands wrapped around my arm, its touch icy and burning at the same time. I screamed and lashed out with the knife, slicing into its pale flesh. The creature recoiled with a guttural hiss, black ichor oozing from the wound. "Run," the ranger shouted, pulling me to my feet. We stumbled downhill, the creature's cries following us. I could feel its presence, its hatred, pressing against me like a physical force. The forest seemed to thin out, and I caught a glimpse of headlights in the distance. "The road!" I cried, hope surging through me. With one final burst of energy, we broke through the tree line and onto the pavement. A car screeched to a halt, and the driver jumped out, shouting in alarm. Behind us, the creature stopped at the edge of the forest, its form barely visible in the shadows. It watched us, its empty sockets glowing faintly, before melting back into the trees. The ranger and I collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for breath. "What was that?" I finally managed to ask. The ranger shook his head. "I don't know. But it doesn't belong here. And neither do we." The headlights illuminated our battered forms as the driver approached cautiously. He was an older man with kind eyes, but his face twisted in shock when he saw the state we were in, his scratches, torn clothes, and wild, terrified expressions. "What happened to you two?" he asked, his voice trembling. "We need to get out of here," the ranger said firmly, grabbing the man by the shoulder. "Now." The man didn't argue. He helped us into his truck, glancing nervously at the edge of the forest. As we sped away, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature charging after us. But the road remained empty, and the forest grew smaller with every passing second. The ranger and I didn't speak during the ride. What could we say? The reality of what we had seen and experienced defied explanation. The driver dropped us off at a small diner on the outskirts of a nearby town. Inside, the warmth and chatter of other customers felt almost surreal, a stark contrast to the nightmare we had just escaped. "You two look like you've been through hell," the waitress said as she poured us coffee. "We have," the ranger replied, his voice hollow. As we sipped our coffee, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me with a crushing sense of dread. "What happens now?" I asked the ranger. He stared into his cup, his jaw tight. "I don't know. But this isn't over." The ranger disappeared into the town, his plan vague but determined. I stayed behind at the diner, my coffee long gone cold as I stared out the window. The world outside was bright and ordinary, completely at odds with the nightmare that clung to me like a second skin. I needed to act, to warn people about the creature, but the ranger's words echoed in my mind, "Be careful who you tell, who would believe me?" I opened my laptop, intending to write a detailed account of what had happened, but I stopped halfway through the first sentence. My hands hovered over the keyboard, doubt creeping in. The story sounded insane, even to me. Without proof, it would be dismissed as a hoax, or worse, as the ramblings of a delusional person. Still, I couldn't ignore the responsibility weighing on me. People needed to know. Instead of writing a public account, I began compiling a private record. I described everything in painstaking detail: the forest, the creature, the attack, and the warning the ranger had given me. I included sketches of the creature based on my memory and descriptions of the sounds it made. When I finished, I saved the file and emailed it to a handful of trusted friends with the subject line, "In case something happens to me." After hitting send, I felt a small measure of relief. If nothing else, the truth would be preserved, even if it wasn't believed. I was about to close my laptop when my phone buzzed. It was the ranger. "I found someone," he said without preamble. "Meet me at the library on Main Street in an hour." The library was old and quiet, the kind of place that smelled of dust and forgotten stories. I found the ranger sitting at a corner table with a woman who looked like she belonged in an adventure novel, tall, with short, messy hair, and a leather satchel slung over her chair. "This is Dr. Marion Hensley," the ranger said as I sat down. "She's an anthropologist and folklorist. If anyone knows what we're dealing with, it's her." Marion nodded curtly. "I've heard a lot of strange tales in my time," she said, "but yours is unique. A creature tied to the forest, predatory, with an unnatural form and behavior. This is something ancient." "Ancient?" I repeated, my stomach twisting. "Yes," she said, pulling a battered notebook from her satchel. She flipped through the pages, revealing sketches and notes in neat handwriting. "There are stories from indigenous peoples and early settlers about a guardian of the forest, something neither human nor animal, born from the land itself. It's said to protect the balance of the wilderness, but over time, these guardians can become corrupted." "Corrupted how?" the ranger asked. "By human interference," Marion said. "Deforestation, pollution, overhunting. The stories say that when the balance is broken, the guardian turns against humanity." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "How do we stop it?" Marion hesitated. "That's the problem. The stories vary. Some suggest appeasement, offering a token of respect to the forest. Others speak of banishment rituals, but those require knowledge we don't have. Then what do we do?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. She looked at me with a somber expression. "You have to stay away. Warn others to stay away. If it's tied to that forest, leaving it undisturbed might be the only way to contain it." The ranger shook his head. "That's not good enough. People go into those woods all the time. We can't just let it keep hunting." Marion sighed. "I'll do more research. There might be a way, but it'll take time. In the meantime, you need to keep people out of that forest." Over the next few weeks, the ranger and I threw ourselves into the task. We posted warnings, spoke to locals, and reported the forest as a hazardous area to authorities. But the creature wasn't idle. Despite our efforts, more people went missing. Hikers, campers, even a park ranger who had gone in to investigate. Each disappearance weighed on me like a stone. Late one night, Marion called. "I think I found something," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "What is it?" "There's a ritual," she said. "It's risky, and I don't know if it will work, but it's the only lead we have. Meet me at the forest entrance tomorrow at dawn." The morning arrived shrouded in mist, the kind that clings to your skin and muffles every sound. I met Marion and the ranger at the forest entrance, the weight of dread pressing down on me like an iron chain. Marion carried her satchel, now bulging with books, vials, and other items I couldn't identify. The ranger had brought a hunting rifle, though we both knew it would likely be useless. "What's the plan?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound steady. Marion pulled out a folded piece of parchment and spread it on the hood of the ranger's truck. It was covered in handwritten notes and diagrams. This ritual is meant to restore balance, she explained. It's not about destroying the creature, it's about returning it to its original purpose as a guardian. But it's dangerous. The creature will sense what we're trying to do and fight back. What do we need to do? The ranger asked. Marion pointed to a clearing marked on a map of the forest. We need to go here. It's the heart of the forest, the place where the balance was first broken. We'll perform the ritual there. And if it doesn't work? I asked. Marion's gaze was grim. Then we run. And we don't stop. We entered the forest in single file, the mist swallowing us whole. Every step felt heavier than the last, the air thick with tension. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. As we approached the clearing, Marion handed each of us a small pouch filled with herbs and stones. Keep these on you, she said. They're meant to ward off the creature, but they'll only work for a short time. The clearing was exactly as Marion had described. A circular patch of earth surrounded by towering trees, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the weak morning light. In the center was an ancient stone altar, cracked and weathered by time. Marion began setting up for the ritual, arranging candles, spreading herbs, and drawing intricate symbols on the ground with chalk. This altar is old, she said, her voice tinged with reverence. It was likely used for ceremonies long before any of us were born. The ranger stood guard, his rifle at the ready, while I helped Marion where I could. My hands shook as I placed the final candle on the altar. Ready? Marion asked, looking at both of us. Let's do it, the ranger said, though his jaw was tight with fear. Marion began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, her voice low and rhythmic. The symbols on the ground began to glow faintly, and the air around us seemed to hum with energy. At first, nothing happened. Then the forest came alive. A guttural screech tore through the clearing, and the shadows beneath the trees began to shift and ripple. The creature emerged, its grotesque form even more horrifying in the dim light. Its empty sockets glowed faintly, and its jagged grin twisted into something almost mocking. The ranger raised his rifle and fired, but the bullets had no effect. The creature lunged at him, its movements impossibly fast. He barely managed to dodge, retreating toward the altar. Keep it distracted, Marion shouted, her focus unbroken as she continued the chant. I grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and swung it at the creature, not caring how futile it was. The branch connected with its side, and the creature recoiled, its head snapping toward me. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath us trembled. The symbols on the altar flared brighter as Marion's chant reached a crescendo. The creature screeched again, its voice filled with fury. It lunged at Marion, but the ranger tackled it midair, sending them both crashing to the ground. Finish it, the ranger shouted, struggling to hold the creature back. Marion pulled a vial from her satchel and poured its contents over the altar. The glowing symbols erupted into flames, and a shockwave rippled through the clearing. The creature let out an ear-piercing wail, its form distorting and flickering like a shadow caught in a violent wind. And then, it was gone. We stood in stunned silence, the forest eerily still. The altar's glow faded, and the mist began to lift, revealing a pale morning sky. Did it work? I asked, my voice hoarse. Marion nodded, though her face was pale and drawn. I think so. The balance has been restored, for now. The ranger slumped to the ground, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Let's hope it stays that way. As we left the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of the creature. It was tied to the forest, yes, but its presence was a reminder of the fragile balance we had disrupted. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Leaving the forest felt like waking from a nightmare, but the relief was short-lived. The events of that day clung to me like a second skin, impossible to shake. Even as Marion assured us that the balance had been restored, I couldn't forget the creature's wail or the way it had dissolved into the shadows. Back in town, life resumed, but not for us. The ranger and I stayed in touch, meeting regularly to discuss what we had experienced. Marion, true to her word, delved deeper into the lore surrounding the creature, uncovering fragments of knowledge that only deepened the mystery. Weeks passed, and for a time, it seemed the forest had gone quiet. No new disappearances were reported, and the locals began to venture back into the woods. But for me, the silence was unnerving. It wasn't peace, it was a warning. One night, my fears were confirmed. I woke to the sound of scratching at my window. My apartment was on the third floor, and there was no way anyone or anything could be outside. Heart pounding, I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain. Nothing. I told myself it was just a branch or the wind, but as I turned away, I heard it again. This time, it was coming from the door. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to move. Grabbing the hunting knife I had kept since that night in the forest, I approached the door. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. No answer. I flung the door open, the knife ready, but the hallway was empty. Just as I was about to step back inside, I noticed something on the floor, a small bundle of twigs tied with a piece of red thread. My blood ran cold. It was a token of the forest, something I had seen in Marion's research. The guardian, or whatever it had become, was reaching beyond its boundaries. I called the ranger immediately. "It's back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't hesitate. "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." By the time he arrived, the bundle of twigs had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. The ranger examined the area, but there was nothing unusual, at least, nothing tangible. "It's a warning," he said grimly. "It knows we stopped it, and it wants us to know it hasn't forgotten." Marion joined us the next day, her expression as grave as the ranger's. "This isn't supposed to happen," she said, pacing my living room. "The guardian is tied to the forest. It shouldn't be able to extend its influence this far." "Maybe the ritual didn't work," I suggested, dread coiling in my stomach. "No," she said firmly. "The balance was restored. This is something else." The three of us spent hours poring over Marion's notes, searching for answers. What we found was even more unsettling than the creature itself. "The guardian's corruption," Marion said, pointing to a passage in one of her books, "isn't just the result of human interference. It feeds on fear, on chaos. The more it spreads, the stronger it becomes." "So, it's not bound to the forest anymore?" the ranger asked. Marion hesitated. "It's adapting. Evolving. And if we don't stop it soon, it might not have any boundaries at all." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Marion worked tirelessly to create a new plan, one that would not just restore balance but sever the creature's connection to this world entirely. "It's risky," she warned us. "The creature won't just sit back and let us do this. It will fight harder than ever. The ritual would require us to return to the heart of the forest, to the same altar where we had performed the first ritual. But this time, we wouldn't be trying to restore balance, we'd be attempting to banish the creature permanently." "I'll go," I said, surprising even myself. "You don't have to do this," the ranger said, his voice filled with concern. "Yes, I do," I replied. "This thing came for me. It's not just about the forest anymore, it's personal." We set out at dawn, the air heavy with anticipation. The forest seemed darker than before, as if the creature's presence had poisoned it further. The once familiar path to the altar now felt foreign, every step fraught with unseen dangers. When we reached the clearing, the altar was cracked, its once glowing symbols faint and broken. "It's already weakening," Marion said. "We don't have much time." She began setting up for the ritual, her movements precise and deliberate. The ranger and I stood guard, every sound setting us on edge. As Marion started the chant, the forest erupted in chaos. Shadows moved unnaturally, twisting and writhing like living things. The creature emerged, more grotesque and twisted than before. Its form seemed to pulse with dark energy, its empty sockets glowing with malevolent light. The ranger fired his rifle, but the creature barely flinched. It lunged at Marion, who didn't break her chant even as the creature's claws raked the air inches from her face. I ran at it, swinging the hunting knife with all my strength. The blade connected, slicing into its pale, sinewy flesh. The creature let out a deafening screech, turning its attention to me. "Keep it distracted," Marion shouted. "I'm almost there." The ranger and I fought with everything we had, dodging its attacks and striking whenever we could. But the creature was relentless, its movements faster and more erratic than ever. Finally, Marion's chant reached its peak. She raised a vial of shimmering liquid and poured it over the altar. The ground beneath us shook violently, and a blinding light erupted from the symbols. The creature let out one final, ear-splitting wail as its form began to dissolve, consumed by the light. And then, silence. When the light faded, the creature was gone. The forest was still, its oppressive darkness lifted. The altar was reduced to rubble, its power spent. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice trembling. Marion nodded, though her expression was weary. "For now. But we've only delayed the inevitable. If humanity keeps pushing the balance, something worse could take its place." The ranger placed a hand on my shoulder. "We did what we could. That's all anyone can do." As we left the forest for the final time, I couldn't help but glance back. The shadows seemed less threatening, the trees more welcoming. But I knew better than to let my guard down. The creature was gone, but the forest would never forget. Neither would I. The days that followed felt surreal, as if the events in the forest had been part of some fevered dream. But the aches in my muscles, the scars on my arms, and the memories etched into my mind reminded me that it was all too real. Marion disappeared shortly after the ritual. She left a cryptic note for the ranger and me, thanking us for our bravery and urging us to stay vigilant. "I'll continue my work elsewhere," she had written. "The balance has been restored for now, but the world is full of such places, and others may need my help." I never saw her again. The ranger returned to his duties, though he, too, was forever changed. The light-hearted camaraderie he once shared with his fellow rangers was replaced by a quiet seriousness. He became the unofficial guardian of the forest, ensuring that no one ventured too deep and warning them of the dangers they couldn't understand. As for me, I tried to return to a normal life, but it wasn't easy. The nights were the worst. I would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I heard scratching at the window or saw shadows moving in the corners of my room. I avoided the forest, but it seemed to haunt me nonetheless. Strange dreams plagued me, visions of the creature, of the forest reclaiming its dominance, of a world where humanity's encroachment had gone too far. One morning, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with notes and sketches. It was from Marion. The first page bore a short message. "Emily, *. The work isn't done. You've seen the truth, and that makes you part of it. Use this knowledge wisely. Stay safe, *. Marion *. The journal was a treasure trove of information, rituals, myths, warnings, and symbols from cultures around the world. As I flipped through its pages, a thought occurred to me: Marion hadn't just passed on her knowledge, she had passed on her mission. I spent weeks studying the journal, trying to make sense of its cryptic entries. The more I learned, the more I realized how interconnected the world's stories were. The creature in the forest wasn't unique, it was part of a larger pattern. Guardians, corrupted spirits, ancient forces, they existed everywhere, hidden in the shadows of the natural world. One entry caught my attention. It described a similar guardian in a remote part of South America, a being tied to the jungle rather than a forest. Unlike the creature we had faced, this one hadn't yet turned against humanity. But the signs of its corruption were beginning to show. I couldn't ignore it. I reached out to the ranger, showing him the journal and explaining what I had found. He was hesitant at first, but I could see the same determination in his eyes that had driven us through the forest. "If we don't act," I said, "it'll happen again. Somewhere else. To someone else." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" I nodded. Then I'm coming with you, he said. The decision set us on a new path, one neither of us had ever imagined. Armed with Marion's journal and the lessons we had learned, we began our journey into the unknown. The forest had been our trial, but it was only the beginning. Would you like to follow their next adventure or expand on their journey's implications for humanity and the natural world? The first step of the journey was daunting, researching a place neither of us had ever been, understanding a culture we barely knew, and preparing for dangers we couldn't fully anticipate. The journal became our guide, though its cryptic entries often raised more questions than answers. The ranger, whose name I had learned was Paul, and I pored over maps, satellite images, and historical accounts of the remote South American jungle mentioned in Marion's notes. The creature, if it truly existed, was tied to an ancient settlement now swallowed by the jungle. The journal described it as a guardian, but it hinted at troubling signs of imbalance, changes in animal behavior, missing travelers, and whispers of an eerie presence. We booked our flights, packed what we thought we might need, and set out for a destination that felt like stepping off the edge of the map. The air in the jungle was heavy and damp, clinging to us like a second skin as we disembarked from the small plane. The village we landed in was modest, little more than a collection of wooden houses and a single dirt road. But the people were kind, offering us food and curious smiles as we explained our purpose. "We're researchers," Paul said, sticking to the cover story we'd agreed upon. "We're here to study the ecosystem around the old ruins." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. "Be careful," an elderly man finally said, his voice low. "The forest is angry. It doesn't like outsiders." I shivered, remembering similar warnings from the locals near the forest where we had encountered the first creature. Guided by a local tracker named Javier, we ventured deeper into the jungle. The dense foliage and cacophony of wildlife created a sensory overload. Every rustle, chirp, and distant howl set my nerves on edge. As we approached the ruins, Javier grew visibly uneasy. "This is as far as I go," he said, stopping abruptly. "The forest beyond here, it's different." Paul and I exchanged a glance, both remembering Marion's warnings. "We'll be careful," Paul assured him. Javier shook his head. "It's not about being careful. It's about not being welcome." The ruins were unlike anything I had imagined. Crumbling stone structures peeked through the dense vegetation, their surfaces adorned with faded carvings. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the oppressive silence made the jungle feel more alive than ever. We found what we believed to be the heart of the site, a circular stone platform surrounded by towering trees. It was eerily similar to the clearing where we had faced the forest guardian, but this place felt older, more sacred. Paul set up a perimeter while I examined the carvings. Marion's journal had included sketches of symbols, and I recognized several etched into the stone. "They're warnings," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's been corrupted. It's no longer a guardian." Paul nodded grimly. "Then we'd better figure out how to stop it." That night, the jungle came alive. We had pitched a small tent near the ruins, though neither of us expected to sleep. The air grew colder, and the sounds of wildlife faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the earth. I stepped out of the tent, flashlight in hand, and froze. The jungle was bathed in an eerie green light emanating from the ruins. Paul emerged behind me, his rifle at the ready. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The ground beneath us trembled, and a shadow began to form on the platform. It was enormous, its shape-shifting and fluid, like smoke trapped in a jar. "It's here," I said, my voice shaking. The creature took form, its limbs elongated and its eyes glowing with the same malevolent light we had seen before. But this one was different, larger, more powerful, and more unstable. Paul raised his rifle, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said. "It won't work." Instead, I pulled out Marion's journal and flipped to the page detailing the banishment ritual. "We have to do this now," I said, my hands trembling as I handed him the journal. Paul nodded, his jaw set in determination. The ritual required us to mark the stone platform with symbols, light specific herbs, and recite an ancient chant. The creature watched us with unblinking eyes, its presence pressing against us like a physical weight. As we began, it moved, circling the platform with unnerving speed. The air grew colder, and the green light pulsed like a heartbeat. "Hurry!" Paul shouted, covering me as I finished the last symbol. I lit the herbs, their smoke curling into the air, and began the chant. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to keep going, the ancient words feeling foreign on my tongue. The creature lunged at me, but Paul stepped between us, swinging a burning branch to drive it back. It howled, a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. The symbols on the platform began to glow, and the ground shook violently. The creature shrieked, its form dissolving into tendrils of shadow that were pulled toward the light. "Keep going!" Paul yelled, his voice barely audible over the chaos. I repeated the chant, my voice growing stronger as the creature's form disintegrated. Finally, with one last, bone-chilling wail, it vanished, leaving the jungle eerily silent. We sat on the platform, gasping for breath, the glow of the symbols fading into darkness. "Did we do it?" Paul asked, his voice raw. I nodded, though a deep unease still gnawed at me. "For now." Back in the village, Javier greeted us with a knowing look. "You've quieted it," he said. "But the forest never forgets." Paul and I exchanged a glance, his words echoing Marian's warnings. As we left the jungle, I couldn't help but wonder how many other places like this existed, how many corrupted guardians lay in wait, feeding on fear and imbalance. The journal was still in my pack, its pages filled with secrets yet to be uncovered. Our journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Returning to civilization after the ordeal in the jungle felt like stepping into a world that had moved on without us. Paul and I were different now, marked not just by our experiences but by the knowledge we carried. The world wasn't as safe or as ordinary as people liked to believe, and it was impossible to unsee the truth. Back at my apartment, I laid Marian's journal on the table and stared at it. Its worn cover and frayed edges belied the enormity of the burden it represented. "What now?" Paul asked, leaning against the wall, his exhaustion evident. I flipped through the journal's pages, stopping on a section that detailed other sites like the jungle ruins. Marian had compiled fragments of myths and oral histories from around the world, deserts, mountains, even urban areas where guardians had once protected balance but had since been corrupted. "There are more," I said, tapping a map scrawled with circles and annotations. "We stopped one, but it's just a piece of a larger pattern." Paul sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're saying we keep going? That we track these things down and, what? Banish them one by one?" I looked up at him, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "What choice do we have? If we don't, who will?" Our next destination was a desert plateau in North Africa, where Marian's notes hinted at a guardian tied to an ancient spring that had long since dried up. The stories spoke of a shadowy figure that wandered the sands, its presence heralded by whispers on the wind and the sudden appearance of water in places it didn't belong. This time, we prepared more thoroughly. Marian's journal had taught us valuable lessons, and we weren't about to make the same mistakes. We carried protective talismans, studied the local folklore, and enlisted the help of a desert guide named Amara, whose knowledge of the terrain was unparalleled. The journey across the desert was grueling. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, and the nights were bitterly cold. Amara led us with quiet efficiency, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. "It said the spirit of the spring punishes those who disturb its rest," she told us one evening as we sat around a small fire. "But lately, it's been punishing indiscriminately. Farmers, traders, even children. It's angry." Paul and I exchanged a glance. The pattern was unmistakable. We reached the plateau after 3 days of travel. The air was unnaturally still, and the sand seemed to shift under our feet, as though alive. At the center of the plateau was a cracked basin, its edges lined with stones carved with symbols similar to those we'd seen in the jungle. "This is the heart of it," Amara said, her voice low. As we set up for the ritual, the wind began to pick up, carrying with it a faint, mournful wail. The basin seemed to pulse with energy, and the sand around us began to swirl. Paul gripped his rifle tightly. "It's starting." The guardian appeared as a shimmering figure made of sand and water, its form constantly shifting. It moved with a strange grace, its hollow eyes fixed on us. Amara gasped, clutching the talisman around her neck. It's more powerful than I imagined. Marian's notes had warned us that desert guardians were particularly dangerous, their corruption tied to the scarcity of resources in their environment. This one seemed to embody the desperation and fury of a land pushed to its limits. We began the ritual, drawing symbols in the sand and lighting incense that filled the air with a sharp, acrid scent. The guardian moved closer, its form growing larger and more menacing with each step. "Keep it back!" I shouted to Paul, my voice barely audible over the rising wind. Paul fired a shot into the sand near its feet, but the creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it lashed out with a tendril of water, knocking him to the ground. "Focus on the ritual!" Amara yelled, stepping forward with a blade carved with ancient symbols. She slashed at the tendrils, buying us precious seconds. The air grew heavier, and the symbols in the sand began to glow. The guardian let out a deafening roar, its form unraveling as the ritual reached its peak. Amara and Paul held their ground, shielding me as I recited the final incantation. The basin erupted in light, and the guardian dissolved into a spray of sand and water, carried away by the wind. When the light faded, the basin was quiet. The oppressive energy that had filled the plateau was gone, replaced by a strange stillness. "It's done," Amara said, her voice filled with awe. Paul helped me to my feet, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Two down," he said. "How many more to go?" I glanced at the journal, its pages still full of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. "Enough to keep us busy," I said. As we made our way back across the desert, I felt a growing sense of purpose. Each victory was a small step toward restoring the balance, but the task ahead was daunting. The guardians weren't just ancient relics, they were reminders of the delicate relationship between humanity and the natural world. Paul, Amara, and I became a team, united by a mission that felt bigger than ourselves. With Marian's journal as our guide, we set out to face the challenges ahead, knowing that each encounter would test us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. The journey wasn't just about fighting corrupted guardians, it was about understanding the forces that shaped our world and learning how to live in harmony with them. And though the path was fraught with danger, we were ready. The guardians were waiting. The victories in the jungle and desert had given us confidence, but they also taught us caution. Every guardian was unique, each tied to its environment, history, and the specific imbalance that had corrupted it. As we prepared for our next journey, Marian's journal became our most valuable tool. This time, the pages led us to a mountain range in Eastern Europe, where rumors of a corrupted guardian had begun to spread among the locals. It was said to reside in a valley shrouded in perpetual mist, a place where livestock went missing, and hikers returned with tales of strange whispers and shadowy figures. Amara chose to stay behind, citing responsibilities in her village, but she promised to join us again in the future. Paul and I boarded a train bound for the mountains, our bags packed with supplies and our minds heavy with anticipation. The train wound its way through the rugged terrain, the landscape growing more foreboding with each passing mile. By the time we reached the small mountain village at the base of the range, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The villagers were wary of us, their eyes filled with a quiet fear. They spoke in hushed tones about the guardian, referring to it as the Warden of Mist. "It was a protector once," an elderly woman told us in a thick accent. "But now it hunts. It doesn't protect, it punishes." The following morning, we set out with a local guide named Luca, who had reluctantly agreed to take us to the edge of the mist-shrouded valley. "This is as far as I go," he said, stopping at the tree line. "Beyond here, the mist doesn't let you leave." Paul and I exchanged a glance, then nodded. We thanked Luca and stepped into the mist. The valley was like stepping into another world. The air was damp and cold, and the mist clung to us, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground echoing eerily. "Stay close," Paul said, his voice tight. We followed Marian's notes, which described a stone circle at the center of the valley. The journey was disorienting, the mist playing tricks on our senses. Shadows moved at the edges of our vision, and faint whispers seemed to come from every direction. Finally, we reached the stone circle. The ancient monoliths were weathered but still standing, their surfaces covered in carvings that matched those in Marian's journal. This is it, I said, pulling out the journal. Paul nodded, setting up a perimeter while I prepared the ritual. The first sign of the guardian's presence was the change in the air. The mist grew thicker, swirling around us like a living thing. The whispers grew louder, forming words in a language I couldn't understand. Then, it appeared. The Warden of Mist was a towering figure, its body composed of swirling fog and its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if it had all the time in the world. Paul raised his rifle but hesitated. "What's the plan?" he asked. "Distract it," I said, lighting the first set of candles. "I need time to complete the ritual." The warden let out a low, mournful wail, the sound reverberating through the valley. Paul fired a warning shot, the sound echoing into the mist. The creature didn't react. Instead, it extended a long, misty limb toward him. Paul dodged, swinging a torch at the limb. The mist recoiled, and the warden let out another wail, this one filled with anger. As Paul kept the guardian occupied, I worked as quickly as I could. The ritual required me to trace symbols on the stones and recite a chant that felt like it was burning my throat. The warden grew more aggressive, its movements faster and more erratic. It lashed out, knocking Paul to the ground and turning its attention to me. I froze as its glowing eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I felt like I was drowning, the weight of the mist pressing against my chest. "Finish it!" Paul shouted, struggling to his feet. With a final burst of will, I completed the chant. The symbols on the stones glowed brightly, and the mist began to retreat, spiraling toward the warden like water draining from a sink. The warden let out a deafening roar as its form was pulled into the stone circle. The light grew blinding, and then, in an instant, the valley was silent. When the mist cleared, the valley was bathed in sunlight for the first time in decades. The stone circle was cracked and lifeless, its power spent. Paul helped me to my feet, his face pale but relieved. "Is it over?" "For now," I said, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface of something much larger. As we returned to the village, the locals greeted us with cautious gratitude. They seemed relieved but wary, as if they knew the balance was fragile and could tip again at any moment. That night, Paul and I sat by the fire in the small inn, the journal open between us. "How many more of these things are out there?" he asked. I traced a finger over the map, the countless circles and annotations overwhelming. "Too many," I said. "But we'll face them one by one." Paul raised his glass. "To the next one, then." I clinked my glass against his, the weight of our mission pressing down on us. The guardians were waiting. And so were we. As we prepared for the next chapter of our mission, the weight of the journal seemed heavier than ever. Each entry hinted at a deeper truth, a thread connecting all these corrupted guardians. The pattern wasn't random, there was purpose behind it. The next destination was unlike any we'd faced before. Deep in the heart of a sprawling urban city, Marion's notes described a guardian bound not to nature but to humanity itself. This guardian had been tied to the city's lifeblood, its water systems, its infrastructure, its people. But as the city grew and changed, the balance was disrupted, and the guardian began to falter. The urban guardian, Marion had written in her journal, is perhaps the most vulnerable. Its purpose is tied to human order, yet it exists within human chaos. When the chaos becomes too great, the guardian cannot adapt, it fractures. Paul and I studied her notes carefully, knowing this challenge would be unlike any we had faced. The city was massive, a maze of concrete and steel teeming with life. The air buzzed with energy, but there was an undercurrent of unease, a tension that seemed to permeate every corner. Our research led us to an abandoned water treatment plant on the outskirts of the city. The plant had been shut down years ago, but locals whispered about strange occurrences, lights flickering at night, the sound of rushing water where none should exist, and figures glimpsed in the shadows. We arrived at dusk, the sun casting long shadows across the derelict buildings. The air was heavy with moisture, and the faint smell of stagnant water lingered. "This place gives me the creeps," Paul muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his machete. "Stay focused," I said, though I couldn't deny the knot of fear in my stomach. The plant's interior was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and dark corridors. Water dripped from broken pipes, and the walls were coated with moss and grime. As we moved deeper into the building, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence settled around us.